It's a great privilege to introduce the Director General of ESA, Jean-Jacques Daudin. This man is the most qualified person I can think of to talk about tonight's subject, which is the 10th anniversary of ISS, because he's actually lived the whole business from, as we say in Britain, from soup to nuts, from the first course to the last course. He's seen every aspect of it, the technical aspect, the international political aspect, all of the development, all the trials, all the difficulties. I read his resume, and I noticed two things in going through it. The first thing is that he is a certified smart person. He really is. He was professor at the École nationale supérieure de l'aéronautique et l'espace for many, many years, and then even better, senior lecturer in mechanical engineering at the École Polytechnique. So he's smart. The other thing is everybody tells me he works very, very hard. He's done a lot. He applied to be an ESA astronaut, but became, as he said, Director General instead, which I think is definitely a net advantage for ESA and all the rest of us. So I thought I was very impressed by all of this, but then I started talking to his friends for the lowdown, the personal info about him, and this is what I found out. He's the hardest working man in ESA and in the space business. Everyone says that. To relax, he rebuilds Volkswagen Beetles. And I used to do that too. I didn't find it very relaxing. I did it because I was poor, but he does it to relax. He runs marathons and collects and drinks malt whiskey, but not at the same time. He, in fact, has run 5 marathons, and his best time was better than 3:20, which to me is incredible. And he collects round spectacles, which is how you know who he is, and one pair has flown in space. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present to you Jean-Jacques Daudin to talk about the 10th anniversary of ISS.
Okay, thank you very much. I am not so sure that you know me better now. But thank you very much for all these details. So first of all, I was exactly asking to me that question, why me? Why me to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the International Space Station? Because I am certainly not the only one among the 5 partners. And I am just one of them. And I see in the audience even some of my friends, and I see just in the front row John David Bartu. He could have spoken about the space station. And especially because ESA is not the most important one of these 5 partners. And 10 years ago, we were still partner on ground, as I said. And I must say that we have waited for 10 years to be partners in space. So why me? So I have tried to answer that question. It's maybe just to thank ESA for being patient and have waited for 10 years to become partner in space. But the answer is no, because the Japanese, they have been even more patient. Maybe just because the Congress is taking place in an ESA member state. But it's no, because it's a member state which is not contributing to the space station. I have heard this afternoon that they may contribute to the manned space flight, but it will not be to the space station. Maybe because the conference takes place the day of the re-entry of the ATV. It's no, because I would have refused, because it would have been too risky to speak today if something was wrong. By the way, it was right. Everything was okay. So I have arrived to the conclusion it's because I am, by far, unfortunately, the longest in duty among the heads of agency of the International Space Station Partnership. And I would like just to recall that when I arrived Director General of ESA on the 1st of July 2003, one of the very first meetings that I have attended as a Director General was a Heads of Agency meeting, which took place in July 2003, organized by Sean O'Keefe in Monterey. And I was the rookie. I was the the one arriving in that club of heads of agency of the International Space Station. But I must say that less than 1 year later, my 4 colleagues had left their position. And I must say that I don't know, I never know if there is a consequence by the fact that I was arriving, so they all left. But this is true, then less than 1 year later, I was the longest in duty, because they all left very soon. So this is certainly the reason why I am qualified to speak about the 10 years of the International Space Station today. So obviously I shall focus my presentation on Europe's contribution, but I shall certainly make more general remarks about the space station itself. So as you can see, this is an interesting picture because it's not anymore the configuration of the space station today, because the ATV that you can see at the bottom of this picture is not there anymore, is back to Earth since this afternoon. So I shall pass through these different topics, but again I shall make some comments along this type of presentation. So what is Europe's participation? Because as David Williams said this afternoon, I am just the Director General of ESA, and I have to speak on behalf of my member states, and to say that 10 member states of ESA are contributing to the International Space Station. Not the 17 ones, by the way, when the decision has been taken to contribute to the International Space Station, there were only 13 member states at that time in ESA. So 10 member states are representing Europe's contribution to the International Space Station. So you have the list there. Obviously, among these member states, clearly the biggest contributor is Germany, and I must say that Germany has been always the leader of that Europe's participation to the International Space Station, and it's never very easy to be a leader. And I must say that we owe to Germany the fact that Europe has been a very reliable partner to the International Space Station. Italy is the second contributor to the Europe's contribution to the International Space Station, and again Italy is contributing not only through ESA but also through a national program, and I shall come back to that. And then France is also an important contributor. But as usual, the importance of member states as ESA is not measured only through contributions. So this is the 10 member states contributing to the Europe's participation to the International Space Station. And let's say in 10 years with 10 member states, I can tell you that I have lived a lot of change in governments, and meaning that the space station is so important in Europe that the change in government, they have not changed the willingness of these governments to contribute to the International Space Station, which is certainly a good sign for the International Space Station. And as I said, for 10 years we have been a partner on ground, and since February of this year we are a partner in space. So you have in this chart the last 10 years, which have started by an intergovernmental agreement which was signed on the 29th of January 1998, and the first launch, the first element of the space station has been launched on the 20th of November 1998, and it was a Russian-built Zarya module which was launched almost 10 years ago. The station is permanently inhabited since October 2000, and the assembly is scheduled for completion in 2010. So this is the official milestones of the International Space Station. But I would like to recall that the International Space Station has a much longer history than the last 10 years. And we should not forget from where we are coming. And especially I was told that I was on the space station. I was working on the space station more than 20 years ago, so it's much longer than these 10 years. And I must say that the history of the International Space Station is almost 25 years back. And at that time there were two projects in the world, the so-called Space Station Freedom on the western side and Mir 2 on the eastern side. And I just arrived at ESA in '86 in charge of the utilization of the space station. And I must say that it was not a long time after that I was working directly with John David Bartu on the utilization of the space station. And at that time we were, let's say, selling the space station to the users. Unfortunately, it was 20 years ago, and I shall come back to that. So it was already Columbus at that time. It was Columbus, and at that time it was even precise that it was the attached pressurized module, but it was Columbus, just because Columbus at that time there were three pieces in Columbus. There was the attached pressurized module, the man-tended free flyer, and even the polar platform, which became OnVSAT later on. So all that was going well up to the beginning of the 90s. And at the beginning of the 90s, the Iron Wall fell down on ground, and I must say that it fell down in space also. And this is from that point that the two projects, Space Station Freedom and Mir 2, were merged. And this is the reason why what we are celebrating today, it's less than the space station, I would say, but much more the international aspect of the space station. What is important in the space station is the international aspect of that space station, meaning that we had to learn to work together. And I can tell you that at the beginning it was not already very easy to work on the Space Station Freedom. I remember a lot of discussions, for example, on the international standard rack. I can tell you that it was a lot of meetings and a lot of discussions on what could be the international standard rack on board the space station. But when the Russians arrived, I must say that it made the discussions even more difficult. So we had to learn, and we learned a lot. And after that, we had to trust each other. And trust, you cannot buy trust. You cannot sign a check and someone is trusting you. This is something that you build up step by step, and this was certainly a difficult process. And this took some years, from the beginning of the 90s up to 98. Just to say that the Columbus program has been decided several times. I cannot tell you that there were one decision of Columbus. Columbus was decided in 85, in 87, in 93, and in 95. So meaning that each time we had to go back to the member states to ask for a new decision in a different environment. And this is the reason why today the most important asset of the space station is the partnership. And that I am just quoting Mike Griffin. Mike Griffin always said that the most important asset of the space station is the partnership. And this is a very solid partnership, because it's a partnership which has been built up through a lot of difficulties, a lot of programmatic difficulties, including budget difficulties, a lot of technical difficulties, and also tragedy with the loss of Columbia. And the loss of Columbia was not a NASA tragedy, it was a tragedy of the partnership. So the partnership has become stronger and stronger through the difficulties, meaning that today this is a very solid and a very strong partnership. And a lot has been done. I told you, almost 8 years to start the process of the International Space Station. But after that, look at what has been achieved in 10 years. After that, the time was accelerating, and in spite, again, of the Columbia tragedy. So it was 28 shuttle flights, 16 Soyuz crew flights, 30 Progress flights, 1 ATV. Now we can say that we have a full mission of the ATV, 700 hours of external vehicle activities, and 18 major elements added to the original Zarya module. And you have here the list of all the elements which have been added, be they from United States, Russia, Japan, Canada, and ESA, and also Italy, because, as I said, Italy is contributing not only through the ESA program, but also through its national program, and the Harmony, which we call Node 2 in Europe, is an Italian contribution to the space station. So this partnership, I think that there is one. It's very strange. It starts by 2. Okay. No problem. So cooperation is difficult. I shall never say that cooperation is easy. And it's always easier not to cooperate. And I know that. I can tell you that ESA, each time that I have a meeting with member states, sometimes I always reflect that it would be easier not to cooperate. But it would be much more difficult to succeed alone, and especially in Europe. None of the member states of ESA could succeed or could reach the success that they could get through ESA if they were alone. So we have to learn to work together. It's difficult. This requires a lot of effort. But there is some recipes to have success. First of all, you must have a common objective. I think that I am a strong believer in the cooperation according to projects. Cooperation per principle does not work. But when you have one project, one common objective, you have some chance to cooperate. So it's number one. The number two, you have to have clear rules of the game at the start of the cooperation. You must not change the rules of the game during the cooperation. And this is the reason why, be it the Convention of ESA, be it the Memorandum of Understanding that we have with international partners, these rules of the games are very important. And we have to respect these rules of the game. Number three, there must be goodwill. Because if each time there is a problem, we are going back to the rules of the game, let's say, we are driven by legal aspects. And I must say that sometimes the engineering aspects, they have also their reality, meaning that there must be some goodwill on each side of the partnership. But the most important part of the recipe is certainly the personal relationship. Institutional relationships do not work if there is not personal relationship, because at the end, this is just men and women from all over the world working together. Starting with the astronauts which are on board the space station, which have to live and work together in a closed environment. And I must say that I admire the way they are doing that, because sometimes myself, I open the window of my office just to breathe. They cannot even do that on board the space station. But this is not only the astronauts, because for 3 and soon 6 astronauts in orbit, there is several tens of thousands of persons working on ground for those crew. And all these men and women, they have to work together on a daily basis. And I have attended myself some simulations of the ATV operations with 3 control centers, one in Houston, one in Toulouse, and one in Moscow. And I can tell you that the personal relationship which have been built up through these simulations have been a key in the success of ATV operations. So we have no choice but to succeed in our cooperation and to overcome the difficulties. And this is what we have done on board the space station. This is a fantastic endeavor because we have overcome all our difficulties. And we at ESA, I have the one now. Okay, let's proceed. We at ESA, we would have never succeeded without our partners. I am celebrating today the success of the ATV mission, and I am very proud of the ATV. I am very proud of such an achievement. But I wish to recall that the ATV success would not have been possible without the cooperation with the United States and with Russia. Starting with Russia, the docking port of the ATV is coming from Russia, and we are docked to a Russian part of the International Space Station. And on the NASA side for the operations, and including for the project review of the ATV, and I always appreciated the fact that Mike Griffin in person attended the project review of the ATV, meaning that the ATV is not only an ESA project. This is a project of the partnership, and the success of ESA is the success of the partnership. And I would like to thank again our partners for that very important success. So as you can see, the first contribution of ESA to the space station was launched on the 7th of February 2008 with the launch of the Columbus laboratory. And you can see here our colleague astronaut Hans Schlegel outside the Columbus laboratory during the processing of the Columbus as an integral part of the space station. And I must say that Columbus is a very good laboratory. The start of the utilization of Columbus demonstrates that this is really a laboratory that the scientists will take benefit of. We had some problems with the start of some payloads, as any payload on a ground-based laboratory. I must say that this is complex payload, so I was not scared to have this type of problem when we have started to use the payloads. But now the problems are over and the full utilization has started, and I am sure that we shall have a lot of scientific progress coming from Columbus. Just to recall that Columbus is not only our laboratory, it's a laboratory that we are sharing with all partners, and there is as many NASA payload on board Columbus than we have ESA payloads. So this is an integral part of the International Space Station. This is not an ESA part. This is just one of the laboratories of the International Space Station. A good one, by the way. And the second contribution, as I told you, the mission is over since just a couple of hours, is the ATV. And I must say that the first ATV, Jules Verne, has fulfilled all its objectives beautifully. I would say beyond my expectations. I can tell you that the day of the launch on the 9th of March in Kourou, I was a little bit nervous. And the launch was okay, and I was already glad at that time. But we had a lot of successive steps, and I must say that Jules Verne has fulfilled its mission step by step, fulfilling all the objectives. Including the transfer of fuel, on which I was myself a little bit nervous, to the point that I was asking my project team to not to take on board the Russian fuel, but okay, they have insisted. I was overruled, and they were right. So transfer of fuel to the space station was very good. The transfer of cargo, the reboost of the space station, the maneuvers that the ATV has done for the space station to have collision avoidance with space debris, all that have worked beautifully. And even I have learned that the astronauts, they were using the ATV as a quiet place, and that they were using the ATV also to take some rest. And I am glad for that. So it's at least I can say that ATV is a fully manned vehicle, because it has been used by some astronauts as their quarter to live in. And the re-entry has been made today. I must say that the two boosts which were necessary for the re-entry were very accurate, very precise. The re-entry was very precise, to the point that one of the two NASA aircraft could take pictures of the re-entry, meaning that we shall have a lot of data on the re-entry of the ATV. And I can say that the ATV, we know that it stayed intact down to 80 kilometers of altitude, meaning that the break of the ATV took place at a very low altitude, meaning that the volume of the debris are limited to a small part of the Pacific Ocean. So I must say that the mission of Jules Verne is certainly something that I would like to succeed now with the ATV-2. But okay, I have still to knock at wood on that. Again, as I said, the ATV is something that it's not only an ESA achievement, this is an achievement of all the partners together. So now, what shall we do? First of all, we shall use the International Space Station. We have spent so much time, so much difficulties, so much money to build a space station together, that now the priority of the priority is to use the space station. And it would be a big mistake, and even I would be ashamed if we were not putting all efforts to take the best benefit of that International Space Station. And as I said before, this International Space Station is opening new doors to the scientific world. I think that now they have a permanent access to the microgravity world. They have a permanent access to low Earth orbit. And I am convinced that to have a permanent access to such a laboratory will be followed by a lot of scientific progress. But for that we need time. I cannot tell you tomorrow which are the scientific progress that we shall make. But I am deeply convinced that opening that new door to the scientific community will lead to a lot of progress. And so the next rendezvous will be in 10 years from now, and it will not be anymore celebrating the International Space Station. It will be celebrating the scientific result of the International Space Station. And I give you a rendezvous for that because I am convinced that there will be a lot of results, and a lot of results which will be useful for improving the quality of life on Earth. So this is the first of the priority, using the space station. And then we have to go beyond, and beyond, as it was said this afternoon, beyond is the Moon and Mars, and this is the exploration program. And I think that based on the space station success, we shall start exploring the solar system on a very solid basis. And this is very different from what came on the 60s. I heard this morning and that was the moon too soon. I don't think that the moon was too soon, not only because of the moon, but because I think that through the moon we have discovered the Earth. As you know, I always say that for me the most important sentence given by an astronaut during the Apollo program is not a small step for man and a giant leap for mankind. For me, it's much earlier than that. It's Christmas '68 when Bill Anders was saying that this was the first Apollo mission which went around the moon. And he said that we have made this long way to explore the moon, but the most important thing that we have done is to discover the Earth. And this is certainly the reason why it was not too soon. But it was not the moon, it was the Earth. And I think that the awareness of a global Earth was coming from the moon. But the moon at that time, as Mike Griffin was saying, was the endeavor of one nation, and that it's over. And I think that the International Space Station has brought this new feature, which is the international cooperation for exploration, meaning that the moon now will be the endeavor of all nations which want to join this exploration venture, and starting with a partnership that we have built up through the space station. And this is where I am confident that the exploration will be a successful endeavor. And it's not a question of date. I was asked this afternoon, okay, 2020 for the moon. Okay, if it's 2022, it will not be so different. The most important aspect is that we shall go there together on the moon and Mars. And this is not moon or Mars, this is both. Both are important. And this is just a question of time. But it's not anymore to put one flag, it's to stay there and to use the moon and Mars. And there was a question this afternoon. I shall give you my answer to the question is which flag an international crew will take on Mars. My answer is all flags. We need all flags. Because the flags are very important. Because this is not something which is neutral or impersonal. This is an endeavor of several nations. And I know that at ESA, just to give you my personal experience, 2 months from now, I think that it was in June, Council of June, we have told to the Council, okay, with the increase of the number of member states of ESA, maybe we should remove all the flags from the ESA logo. Because now we are 18 member states, and okay, I am convinced that in 5 years from now we shall be 23, maybe 25 member states. And this is true that to have all these flags, we shall have to have business cards which are much bigger than the other business card. But on the other hand, and this was a clear response from the Council, we need to keep the flags because this is not, again, anyone working at ESA. This is member states of Europe with their flags. And I think that this is very important. And in my view, the best solution is to bring all the flags together and to put that on Mars. Because, again, this is not anymore the endeavor of one nation or two nations. This is the endeavor of all nations. This is my personal feeling. And this is the reason why it's time now that I am giving you what I feel are the lessons learned from the International Space Station, because after 10 years of the space station, and as I said, even maybe 20 years, which are the lessons learned? I have 5 lessons learned. First of all, we have to avoid single point failure. Clearly, we have to establish some redundancies for the next international programs. And because we have been demonstrated that when we have a single point failure, and for example, the space shuttle was a single point failure, meaning that when the space shuttle was grounded, we were all grounded, except the Russians. And I must say, thanks to the Russians, we could continue access to the space station. But at least all the parts which were due to be launched by the space shuttle were grounded at the same time, meaning that clearly we have to review together which are the possible single point failure and to see which are the redundancies that we have to bring into an exploration program to make it more robust and more resistant to any problem that we shall meet anyway during the exploration programs. The second lesson learned, and I was mentioning that when I was saying that with John David 20 years ago we were selling the space station to users. It was much too long for the users. Let's say the users that we were working with John David 20 years ago, they are retired. Meaning that it was an investment which was certainly interesting, but not directly applicable to the space station. And this is certainly one of the important lessons learned, meaning that for the future, we have to make sure that we shall associate the users much earlier in the development of new facilities. I know that this is not so easy, and there was a lot of discussions among the partners. Shall we first complete the space station and then start the utilization, or shall we start the utilization as early as possible during the assembly sequence? And the answer at that time was, let's do the assembly sequence. But because it was already too long and it was not designed to have the utilization as early as possible in the development. But this is something that I would like to discuss with the partners, is how can we associate the users much earlier in the development of new international programs. The third lessons learned is associating the public also. We have not enough associated the public to the International Space Station. And it's not so easy to associate all citizens. But today, clearly, it's difficult to explain to the citizens that they are part of the International Space Station. For most of the citizens, it's something for the scientists, something for the engineers, something for the politicians, and not something for them. And this is certainly something that we are missing. It's how can we do better? And especially the exploration program is something that we have to do with the public, with each citizen. They must feel involved in that exploration program. Because if not, I am afraid that it will not be a solid exploration program. And this is my fourth lesson learned. To associate the public, the best ambassadors are certainly the astronauts. The astronauts are certainly the best ambassadors that we can have vis-à-vis the public. And it's what I said many times when you have introduced me. You said that I tried to be an astronaut, and at the end, since I could not be an astronaut, I just became DG. But this is true. When I am on a podium with an astronaut, nobody cares about the Director General. They are all looking for the astronauts, meaning that just to say that DG is just a backup solution. And this is normal. I am not taking that as something against the Director Generals or the directors. This is normal. A Director General does not look like a citizen. He's a bureaucrat, he's an engineer, he does not look like a citizen, while an astronaut looks like a citizen. And I have read the report made after the symposium in July, and there was a round table with astronauts and with young students. And this is confirming that. Which were the questions of the students? No question about scientific progress. No question about the technology. It was questions of what do you eat? How do you feel on board? Do you dream? How do you sleep? Just normal life. The questions of the public to the astronauts are just questions related to how someone, a man or woman, is living in space instead of living on Earth. And we have to use that. We have to use this attractiveness of astronauts. The astronauts are fantastic persons. they are making a beautiful job in space. But it's even more beautiful on ground. And this is very attractive to be an astronaut. And I can give you statistics. At the same time, I have opened 5 posts of directors in ESA, 80 applicants, and 4 positions of astronauts, 8,000 applicants. Meaning that it's 100 times more attractive to be an astronaut than to be a director. But this is what I have told my colleagues who are candidates to become an astronaut. If you are not becoming an astronaut, don't worry, you have a backup solution, you can become Director General. So it's so this is certainly something which is important. It's how can we associate the citizens, and the best way to associate the citizens is, again, to use the attractiveness of astronauts. And the last is it was too long for users, the space station. But it was even much longer for the young generation. And I must say that arriving at ESA in 1986, when you were a young engineer, and waiting for more than 20 years to see Columbus becoming a reality, it was much too long. And it's not so easy to attract the young talents with programs which are for 20 years from now. I am from a generation, I said that this afternoon, which is a fantastic generation, which have lived space, but at a time where the milestones, they were very short term, 3 years between Sputnik and Gagarin, less than 10 years between Gagarin and Neil Armstrong. Okay, that it was a pace which could attract a lot of young generations. Today we are speaking of 2025, 2035, and in my view it's much too long. So obviously we must have a vision, and it's no use to go back to the moon before 2020, but it means that we have to define milestones which are challenging enough in the short term to attract the young generation, because we need the young talents. We need even the best talents, because space will stay forever a very risky business, especially in terms of technical activities. We are taking a lot of risk, and the only way to manage the risk is to have the best talents. But the best way to attract the best talents is to offer them challenging, short-term milestones, which can attract them. And this is certainly the duty of all the directors of the world, is to make and to organize programs with challenging short-term milestones which would attract all the young generations that I even met this afternoon. So let's work together for the young generation. Thank you very much.
And I've been told you'll take questions.
Take questions.
And Jean-Jacques will take a few questions to fill in the time before the reception. No. Questions, please.
But they know everything on the space station, so it's, I think that...
Could you give a couple of examples of milestones you might see while we're waiting for the moon and Mars? Any ideas?
I think that there is a lot of milestones on robotic missions. Let's say clearly the man will be on the moon 2020. And again, before putting man on the moon, we have to learn on how to use the material in situ, because the biggest difficulty for putting a crew on the moon will be to bring as less material as possible from the Earth, because what is costly is the number of kilos that we shall bring from the Earth to the moon, meaning that the more we can use from the moon to sustain a crew at the surface of the moon is certainly very, very important, because we shall not send anymore a crew just to put a flag or to take back 2 or 3 samples. We are putting a crew to stay there for a while, meaning that we have to know how to use the material. And to do that, we need a lot of missions, and it will not be done in 1 or 2 missions. We have to learn a lot. And this is the reason why. And I think that this is the type of missions which are challenging in terms of technicalities and in terms of even of risks. So, and this is the reason why. What I would like is not just to speak of the milestone 2020. I would like to speak of all the milestones between now and 2020, which are, in my view, necessary before the man is women are put at the surface of the moon. So, and this is what I am missing today. By the way, the same on Mars, because on Mars it will be there will be a lot of other difficulties on Mars, and so it's not the moon against Mars or the other way around, but there is a lot of missions. But for example, ExoMars is a very challenging mission. I can tell you that the people who will work on ExoMars will have a lot of things to solve, and this is not an obvious mission. But there is also missions to the moon, so we have to work on that. Obviously, there is budget constraints. So today I'm speaking out of budget constraints, but this is how the international partners, they have to work together to make sure that we shall combine our resources, and when I say resources, not only money, but our engineers, our scientists, our young people, to make sure that we shall be able to offer to them what they need to be attracted by space, because I have been attracted to space because it was a fantastic period, and I would like that period continue. And unfortunately, this is one of the drawbacks of the space station, maybe the only drawback. It's a lot of benefits from the space station, but the biggest problem for me of the space station is it was much too long. Look at my hair.
Other question?
Okay, yes, I think that
What about Australia?
okay, you want me to bring that on Mars?
Yes.
Okay.
It's your turn.
Okay, I have now a motivation to go to Mars. Thank you.
Another question. That's not really a question. I got a question. Europe and a space vehicle, a manned space vehicle, when do you think we're going to see that?
It's a good question. Okay, not during my term as Director General, number one. But okay, beyond that, I am convinced that Europe should contribute to a crew transportation system. That I am deeply convinced of that, and I have told that to the member states. Now, how? Is it in cooperation, in international cooperation, or is it a 100% European system? That is certainly the question. And it's difficult to answer the question without having talked to the partner, because obviously when you are cooperating, you cannot decide by yourself. So we have the signal from United States that they are ready to cooperate on a lot of different aspects of the exploration, but not for the time being on the crew transportation system. It's one fact, but we need two. As I said, a single point failure is not acceptable. So we have to develop a second one. So is it a second one in cooperation, for example, between Russia and ESA? It's one possible scenario. Japan could be also interested. So we are looking at that. Clearly, the decision will not be taken in 2 months from now. What we are proposing is to have a building block approach where we could make some steps towards something that Europe can offer, be it again for a cooperative transportation system or a 100% European system. It's not only a question of money. It's also a question of money, but it's also a question of architecture with all the partners. And I think that we have to work with the partners on that. But what I would like is not to wait for having the partners giving the final answer to start and work on that, because we are missing some industrial capabilities to have a significant role. And let's build these industrial capabilities first, and then we shall see. So it's not, clearly it's not for 5 years from now. We shall see in 3 years from now what could be the decision taken by Europe on that. But I am convinced that Europe cannot stay forever without a crew transportation system, be it in cooperation or be it at 100% a European system. I am much too ambitious for Europe to believe that we shall stay forever with that element missing in our capabilities. We have a lot of capabilities in Europe, but clearly one is missing, and this is that one.
Yes, sir.
Is there a large enough scientific and technology program for the International Space Station for the next 10 years, or should there be more citizens of the world visiting the space station?
The question is there enough scientific and technological utilization of the space station, or is the space station will become a place for more citizens? So is it more science and technology or more people on board? Frankly speaking, with that space station, I think that it will be more science and technology. That space station has not been designed to welcome much more than 6 astronauts. So maybe one day there will be a space station with much more citizens on board, but that space station, I think that it's definitely much more for science and technology. But I am convinced that we can do a lot of science and a lot of technology on board that space station. But unfortunately, we have sold the space station too soon to the scientific community. And it was certainly, and this is what I said, we were selling the space station 20 years ago. And there was a lot of disappointment because the users which were motivated at that time, and there were a lot at that time, they were waiting for so long that they could not wait for that time. So today we are suffering from having sold the space station to the scientific community too soon. And but now I am sure, I am convinced and deeply convinced that having a permanent access to an environment which is unique that you cannot find on Earth will be used by the scientists and the technologists. So this is for that space station, not for mass tourism for the time being, but maybe one day. I always said that I could not be an official astronaut, but I am ready to buy a ticket the day my salary is giving me the possibility to buy a ticket to go to space. Even I am making an offer. If one of my colleague director of the space agency is ready to launch me in orbit, I am ready, provided it's for free. I'm sorry, I did not hear your question, so if you could, there is no mic there.
Say louder, I'm afraid.
So this is the relationship between United States and which station?
Is the U.S. changing its relation to the ISS in a way that...
Not as far as I know. I must say that clearly United States is one of the two important pillars of the International Space Station, and as I said many times, I don't see any future for that International Space Station without United States. Nobody can replace United States on board that International Space Station. But today I have no special signal coming from the United States that they are changing their position vis-à-vis the International Space Station. We are today working under the assumption that the operations of the space station will continue at least up to 2015. But we have also an agreement among all the space station partners that the decision to stop or to continue to use the space station will be done among all partners. There will not be any unilateral decision by any partner to leave or to continue the space station without the other partners. So it will be a collective decision, and that this is clearly agreed among all space station partners. So the decision will be taken in due time, but there is no reason to take the decision now.
Got time for one more question.
No, but as I said, the exploration program will be fully international. It will start by the partnership of the International Space Station because we have spent almost 20 years to build that partnership. And I can tell you that it took time, it took a lot of difficulty, and what I wish is to make sure that that partnership will continue for all the endeavors that we shall make together. But this partnership is certainly not closed to any additional partner. That I have never heard from my colleagues' partner that we wanted to continue just the 5 of us. This is something which is open to new partners, but obviously we have to agree collectively, the 5 existing partners and any additional partner, on how this extended partnership will be built up. So as far as I am concerned, I have no problem to extend the partnership to any other country willing to contribute. But this is to be discussed among the 5 existing partners, and the 5 existing partners together with the potential partner. I think that this is the way that I see the extension of the partnership. But obviously, China and India, they have a lot of capabilities, and they certainly can help the future exploration programs.
Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques, for a fabulous lecture and answering all the questions. And please, let's all give him a big hand.
Thank you.